Neither will the United States. So why are we trying? What is this really about? Once again, the myth that we're bringing peace, democracy, and freedom to Afghanistan. Yes, as we brought peace, freedom, and democracy to Iraq, there is no peace, freedom, or democracy in Iraq. And there isn't in Afghanistan. There is massive corruption. There is special interest. There's massive profiteering. But why can't we just be honest, ever, about anything? We're going to talk about it. My first guest is standing by. He is Professor Sheldon Wolin, and he is arguably one of our nation's greatest progressive political philosophers and theorists. Now at age 86, he is a professor emeritus of political science at Princeton University. In the past, Professor Wolin served as a bombardier in the South Pacific, receiving his doctorate at Harvard, taught at University of California, Berkeley, and was a major voice for the free speech movement, having influenced many important progressive voices such as Rabbi Michael Lerner, who you will hear tomorrow on this program, Chalmers Johnson, and Cornel West. He has written extensively on such individuals as Plato, St. Augustine of Hippo, Hobbes, Machiavelli, and David Hume, Max Weber, Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and John Dewey. And throughout his teaching career, Professor Wolin has been a champion theorist for particularly focusing on democracy as a means of resisting the totalizing of power by an elite. Now we see that totalizing by power by elite in the oligarchs of Russia. We certainly see it in other countries. Why can't we see it here? And why can't we ever visualize a corporation as being an elite? Yet we define corporations differently. You can kill 54,000 individuals, as was done with Vioxx, and you pay a $5.5 billion fine, your stock goes up, the president of the company gets a bonus. Only in America can you kill 54,000 people and get a raise. Something's wrong with that. But what if we stripped away the corporate protection and made the individuals at the corporation who made those decisions to cover up a dangerous drug and to market it, what if we made them personally responsible? What then would change? We're going to talk about that. His latest book is called Democracy Incorporated, Managed Democracy and the Specter of Inverted Totalitarianism, Princeton University Press, which is one of the most important books to have appeared during the past years to deconstruct the ghastly apparition of what democracy has become today. Nice to have you with us today, sir.
Thank you.
And we are broadcasting live from our studio. I'm back in the studio after a month out on the road. People can watch this program by going to GaryNull.com. The sleeve of your book, Democracy, reads, quote, Democracy Incorporated is one of the most worrying diagnoses of America's political ills to emerge in decades. It is sure to be a lightning rod for political debate for years to come. Now, at present, the idea you have become best known for after the domination of the three branches of government by a radical conservative ideology within the Republican Party of George Bush is that American politics has moved into a period where democracy is being managed by a politicized free market corporate elite that shepherds the citizens and is resulting in a new kind of totalitarianism. Unlike totalitarianism of the past, such as those of Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin, or other dictatorships, that you call inverted totalitarianism. So, if you would please take your time and explain in detail what you mean by inverted totalitarianism.
Well, perhaps the best way to approach the problem is to where I started from. This was during the Bush administration. I began where there was much talk, of course, about promoting democracy. But when one looked around, one saw something very different. The most striking fact, it seemed to me, was that America had become an empire. And whatever else it may be, empire and democracy don't go very well together. Empire means subordination, domination. Democracy means equality at the very least. At the same time, there were other worrying signs. There was this endless war in Iraq. There were the growing differentials in wealth between citizens. There was the lack of political interest on the part of the vast majority of Americans. There was the deterioration of social services of the kind that served the vast majority of the people, including the decline of education. And above all, it seemed to me there was no mention in the talk about democracy of the role that corporate power had assumed. So that what I began to see was a kind of democracy that was at worst absolutely meaningless, and at best simply wordplay of one kind or another. The classical totalitarianisms which we associate with Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini were totalitarianisms that emphasized above all that citizens should sacrifice, that they should prepare for war, that there had to be regimentation, mass propaganda, plus terror. Now, the exact opposite of that occurred after 9/11, when George Bush's first words were, "Go out, shop, and fly." Now, that contrast between mobilizing a society and, in effect, demobilizing society in the face of a terrorist attack struck me as really quite odd. And as I began to pursue the thing, I began to believe that we were witnessing a new kind of control that I called in inverted totalitarianism, on the assumption that totalitarianism was not confined to one particular form where one man ruled, dominated. To me, what was important was the system, not the individual. In the case of Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy, Stalin's Russia, the system of totalitarianism was inseparable from the personality of the individual. In all three cases, the individual, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, were the creators of the system. It was in many ways a personal achievement. George Bush was not the creator of inverted totalitarianism. He was simply installed to serve that function. Now, the other important point to remember, it seemed to me, in inverted totalitarianism was the role in which power was seized, the role of power. Now, in the case of the other totalitarianisms, power was seized by, in many cases, illegal coups. In the case of the United States, which we had that very extraordinary 2000 election, in which, by most observers' accounts, George Bush did not win, but by the various machinations that he and his crew performed, they succeeded in establishing him as president when, in fact, he probably had not been elected. Now, to me, what was important there was that you had, in effect, a coup, but even more important, you had absolute public passivity. In the case, nobody took to the streets hardly. There was no great uproar. The opposition party, the Democrats, simply went along with the game. So that in that respect, it seemed to me that a system had developed, or was about to take a new turn. A system had developed in which democracy had been demoted to some kind of electoral charade, in which popular power mattered less than the organized power of certain groups, certain particularly elite corporate groups. Now, the beginnings of this system, it seemed to me, went back to the Cold War. That's when so much started to occur, in which corporate power, military power, economic power in general, and the political power of a party began to come together in a kind of an assemblage that looked at politics very differently than it had been looked at before. That politics was now becoming a wholly managed kind of activity in which the electorate was the sole expression of democracy, in which people voted, and then after that you had a system in which various groups, particularly